The year is 1291. In the dying light of an August evening, a woman stands on the walls of Acre, watching an army that stretches beyond the horizon. She is 34 years old. Her name is Melisende of Ibelin, and in 3 days, she will make a choice that historians would spend 7 centuries trying to understand. Behind her, the last Crusader city in the Holy Land prepares for its final night. Children cry in the streets. Men sharpen swords they know won't be enough. Women pack belongings they'll never carry. The air smells of smoke and fear, and the sea that offers no escape. Before her, the Mamluk army of Sultan al-Ashraf Khalil spreads across the plains like a dark tide. 200,000 men, siege engines that can crack stone like eggshells, banners that have conquered every Crusader fortress from Damascus to the Mediterranean. Melisende's hands rest on stone that has stood for 200 years. Stone that Crusader kings touched. Stone that has witnessed the rise and fall of kingdoms. Stone that will not stand for 3 more days. But this isn't a story about the fall of Acre. Every history book tells you about that. The blood, the fire, the end of the Crusader states, the military defeat. This is about what happened after the city fell, in a place no history book mentions. To 47 women whose names were deliberately erased from every record, every chronicle, every map. Until 2019, when archaeologists in Egypt broke through a sealed chamber and found something that stopped the entire academic world cold. If you've ever wondered why certain stories survive while others are buried so deep that even their graves are forgotten, you're in the right place. Here on Israk Historians, we excavate the truths that power tried to bury. Every subscription helps us pull one more voice from the silence. Every view is an act of remembrance. Now, let's go back to those walls. Because Melisende isn't just watching an army approach. She's watching the end of everything she was raised to protect. And she's about to do something that will haunt both empires and echo through centuries of silence. To understand what Melisende did, you need to understand who she was. And to understand that, you need to understand the world that created her. The Kingdom of Jerusalem in 1291 is a ghost of what it once was. 200 years earlier, Crusader knights had carved kingdoms from the Holy Land, building castles that touched the clouds and cathedrals that rivaled anything in Europe. They called it Outre-mer, the land beyond the sea. But empires built on conquest are houses built on sand, and the tide was coming in. By 1291, Saladin's successors, the Mamluks, had reclaimed almost everything. Jerusalem itself fell in 1244. The great fortresses of Crac des Chevaliers and Beaufort had surrendered. One by one, the Crusader cities had gone dark. Acre was the last, the final flame. When it went out, there would be nothing left. Melisende of Ibelin was born into this dying world. Her family, the House of Ibelin, had been the backbone of the Crusader states for generations. Her grandfather had fought beside Richard the Lionheart. Her father had defended Jaffa until the walls crumbled beneath his feet. Her mother had been a Byzantine princess who taught her daughter that survival sometimes required more courage than death. Melisende wasn't supposed to be a warrior. She was educated at the convent of St. Anne in Jerusalem, raised to manage estates, negotiate treaties, and preserve her family's legacy through marriage and politics. She spoke 5 languages: French, Latin, Arabic, Greek, and Armenian. She could calculate taxes, interpret law, and read the politics of a room better than most knights could read a battlefield. But in 1291, none of that mattered, because there were no more estates to manage, no more treaties to negotiate, no more legacy to preserve through marriage. There was only Acre, and the army outside its walls, and the terrible mathematics of the endgame. The siege begins on April 6th. The Mamluk army surrounds the city completely. No supplies in, no refugees out. Just the slow, methodical work of breaking stone and spirit. The siege engines arrive on the 10th day. Massive trebuchets that the Mamluks have perfected over decades of warfare. They launch stones the size of wine barrels. Each impact shakes the foundations. Each hit cracks walls that have stood for generations. At night, you can hear them working, building ramps, digging tunnels, preparing the final assault, the sound of an empire's patience, methodical and endless. Inside Acre, the defenders know how this ends. They've seen it happen to every other city. Surrender means slavery at best, massacre at worst. Resistance means the same thing, just slower. The Hospitaller Knights, the Templars, the Teutonic Knights, every military order in Christendom has sent their best to defend Acre. 15,000 fighting men against 200,000. The mathematics aren't hopeful. But Melisende isn't with the knights. She's in a different part of the city entirely, in the quarter of St. Anne, where something else has been quietly gathering. Since the fall of Jerusalem in 1244, something had been happening across the Crusader states. As cities fell, as armies retreated, as the map of Outremer shrank like ice in summer, certain women had been moving east instead of west. They were noble women, scholars, healers, scribes, women who had spent their lives in convents and courts, preserving knowledge, copying manuscripts, maintaining the records of a dying civilization. They came from Antioch, from Tripoli, from Sidon and Tyre and Jaffa. They came as their cities fell, carrying what they could save: books, chronicles, medical texts, illuminated manuscripts that had taken lifetimes to create, the accumulated knowledge of 2 centuries of cultural exchange between East and West. Everything that made Outremer more than just castles and swords. They gathered in Acre because it was the last place left. And they gathered specifically in the convent of St. Anne because Melisende of Ibelin had spent 3 years turning it into something that didn't officially exist. A library, a scriptorium, a preservation society for a civilization that was about to be erased. By May of 1291, there are 47 women in that convent, ranging in age from 16 to 71. They're not all nuns. Some are, but others are scholars, physicians, translators. One, Lady Eshiva of Montfort, had been a diplomat in the court of the Mongol Ilkhanate. Another, Sister Beatrice, could perform surgery that most physicians considered impossible. Together, they've assembled something extraordinary. Over 800 manuscripts, medical texts from both Arab and European traditions, Greek philosophy that had been lost in the West but preserved in Arabic translation, chronicles of the Crusader kingdoms written by people who lived them, poetry, mathematics, astronomy, theology, the intellectual heritage of Outremer, packed into wooden chests, waiting for an escape that everyone knows isn't coming. On May 15th, Melisende calls them all together. They meet in the chapter house as the trebuchets pound the outer walls. She doesn't lie to them about their chances. She doesn't offer false hope. She tells them the truth. The city will fall. The manuscripts will be destroyed. We will be killed or enslaved. But, and here's where it gets interesting, where the story diverges from every other siege, every other tragic last stand you've ever heard. There's a ship. The ship belongs to a Venetian merchant named Marco Barbarigo, a man who has made a fortune trading between East and West, who knows Acre's harbors better than his own reflection, and who owes Melisende's family a debt that goes back 20 years to when her father saved his life during a riot in Jaffa. He's offered her space on his vessel, enough for maybe a dozen people and whatever they can carry. He'll be leaving on the night of May 17th, slipping out under cover of darkness before the final Mamluk assault. It's a lottery of survival, and Melisende has to choose who gets a ticket. For 2 days she doesn't sleep. She walks among the women, looking at faces, weighing impossible mathematics. Save the youngest? They have the most years ahead of them. Save the eldest? They hold the most knowledge. Save the manuscripts? But which ones? Lady Eshiva argues for taking the diplomatic records. These are eyewitness accounts of 200 years. This is history. Sister Beatrice wants the medical texts. This is knowledge that saves lives. Practical knowledge. Others advocate for the theological works, the philosophy, the poetry. Everyone has a reason. Everyone is right. On the night of May 16th, Melisende makes her decision. And it's not what anyone expects. She's not going. None of them are. The Venetian ship will carry the manuscripts, all of them. Every chest, every scroll, every scrap of parchment they've spent 3 years collecting. But the women will stay. The chamber erupts. This is insanity. This is suicide. Lady Eshiva, normally unflappable, actually raises her voice. You're condemning us all to death for books? Melisende's response is quiet. So quiet they have to lean in to hear it over the distant thunder of siege engines. These books will survive whether we die in Acre or at sea. But if we leave, if we run, we become footnotes, refugees, displaced women who fled with salvaged books. History will record our evacuation, not our achievement. The narrative will be about loss, not preservation. She pauses. The trebuchets pound. Stone cracks somewhere in the outer city. But if we stay, if we choose to stay, if we make our stand here with full knowledge of what's coming, then we become something else. We become a choice, a testament, proof that knowledge was worth more than survival. that some things matter more than breathing. Sister Beatrice, the surgeon, asks the question everyone is thinking. You're asking us to die for symbolism? No, Melisende says. I'm asking you to live for meaning. There's a difference. This is the moment that archaeologists would puzzle over for 7 centuries. Because what happens next doesn't make strategic sense. It doesn't make survival sense. It barely makes human sense. But 46 women, ranging in age from 16 to 71, vote to stay. Not unanimously. 3 of the younger women beg to leave, and Melisende lets them. She's not holding anyone hostage to her philosophy. The Venetian ship will have space for them. But the others? They stay. They help load the manuscripts onto carts. They work through the night of May 17th, moving 800 volumes from the convent to the harbor, watching their life's work sail away into darkness while they turn back toward a city that has maybe 24 hours left to live. Lady Eshiva, watching the ship's lights disappear, says something that was recorded in her journal. A journal that somehow, impossibly, survived. We are ghosts now, haunting a future we'll never see. The question you're probably asking is, why? Why would intelligent women choose certain death? What were they thinking? To answer that, I need to tell you about what they did in those final 24 hours. Because they didn't spend them praying. They didn't spend them preparing for death. They spent them writing. May 18th, 1291. The last full day of Acre. The Mamluk army is building assault ramps. The siege engines have opened breaches in 3 sections of wall. The knights are preparing for the final defense, knowing it's futile, doing it anyway because that's what knights do. And in the convent of St. Anne, 44 women are writing the most extraordinary document of the medieval period. They call it the Testimonium Mulierum, the testimony of women. It's not a chronicle of the siege. It's not a theological treatise. It's not even a goodbye letter. It's a catalog of everything they know, everything they've learned, discovered, translated, and understood during their lives in Outremer. It's a compressed encyclopedia of knowledge, written in a hybrid of Latin and Arabic, designed to be readable by scholars in both East and West. Sister Beatrice writes surgical procedures that won't be rediscovered in Europe for 400 years. Techniques for setting compound fractures, treating infection, even rudimentary anesthesia using herbs and compounds she learned from Arab physicians. Lady Eshiva documents diplomatic protocols between Crusader states and Muslim sultanates. Treaties, negotiations, the intricate dance of coexistence that existed behind the military conflicts. She records things that official histories deliberately omit. Trade agreements honored during wartime. Muslim physicians treating Crusader nobles. Christian scholars studying in Damascus. One woman, Sister Margaret from Antioch, writes an entire section on agricultural techniques. Irrigation systems adapted from Arab engineering. Crop rotation patterns. She includes detailed drawings. Another, Lady Heloise, documents the hybrid language that had developed in Outremer, a pidgin of French, Arabic, and Greek that merchants and common people used. She provides a vocabulary, grammar notes, sample phrases. She's creating a linguistic time capsule of a culture about to be erased. They work in shifts. 4 women writing while others keep watch, tend the oil lamps, prepare meals that no one eats. Every few hours they rotate. The younger women have better eyes for fine script. The older women have more knowledge to record. Melisende herself doesn't write much. She moves between them, organizing, encouraging, making sure the document remains coherent. She's the editor of humanity's last draft before the deadline. As evening falls on May 18th, they hear the change in sound from the walls. The fighting has started. The final assault. The Mamluks have breached the outer defenses. The knights are falling back to the inner city. The women keep writing. Around midnight, they hear screaming from the harbor quarter. The Mamluks have broken through. The city is flooding with soldiers. Buildings are burning. The end is no longer coming. It's here. The women keep writing. Sister Beatrice's hand is cramping. She's 62 years old and she's been writing for 16 hours straight. Her script is getting shaky, but she has 3 more procedures to document and she's going to finish them. Lady Eshiva looks up at one point and says, "We should hide this, bury it, seal it in the walls." Melisende shakes her head. "No, we leave it in plain sight, on the table, in the scriptorium, where whoever comes will find it. They'll destroy it, maybe, or maybe someone will read it first. That's the gamble. It's a strange kind of hope, not hope that they'll survive, hope that something will survive, that the right person will walk through the door before the wrong one does." At 3 a.m. on May 19th, they finish. 247 pages. written in shifts by 44 women, the accumulated knowledge of lifetimes compressed into a single night of frantic documentation. They don't bind it. No time. They just stack the pages carefully on the largest table in the scriptorium, weight the edges with stones so they won't scatter, and place a single note on top. Written in Arabic, Latin, and Greek, it says, "We are the women of Saint Anne. We chose to stay. What we knew, we have written. What we wrote, we leave to you. Judge us not by our deaths, but by what we tried to preserve. The ink is still wet. The knowledge is still true. Do with it what conscience demands." Then they gather in the chapel, not to pray. Well, some pray, but mostly they just sit together in silence, listening to the city die around them, waiting for the doors to break. Melisende sits next to Sister Beatrice. The old surgeon's hands are still ink-stained. She's staring at them like she doesn't quite recognize them as her own. "Do you think it will work?" Beatrice asks. "Does it matter?" Melisende responds. "I suppose not. We did it anyway." Yes, we did it anyway. That phrase, "we did it anyway," that's the whole story, isn't it? That's why we're here, 7 centuries later, talking about 44 women who chose the hardest path because it was the truest one. The doors break at dawn. What happened next was lost for 728 years. The Mamluk soldiers who entered the convent of Saint Anne found 44 women in the chapel. No resistance, no weapons, just women sitting in silence, waiting. The official Mamluk chronicles record the fall of Acre in detail. The military conquest, the destruction of fortifications, the fate of the knights. But they don't mention the convent, they don't mention the women, because officially, nothing happened there worth recording. But here's what we know from other sources. Fragments, pieces that historians have been assembling like a broken mosaic. A Mamluk officer named Badr al-Din al-Najmi kept a personal journal. It wasn't discovered until 1956 in a private collection in Cairo. One entry, dated May 19, 1291, describes entering a Christian building in Acre. He writes, "We found women, many women. They did not flee or fight. They sat like statues. In another room we found papers, writing. One of the scholars read it. He wept. I do not know why. We were ordered to clear the building. I do not know what became of the women or the papers." That's it. That's all. The rest of his journal talks about other parts of the siege. He never mentions it again. But here's where it gets strange, where the story takes a turn that seems almost supernatural until you understand the mundane reality of how empires work. The Mamluks weren't just conquerors. They were administrators, bureaucrats. They cataloged everything they captured. Every sword, every coin, every manuscript had to be logged, assessed for value, and distributed according to complex rules about spoils of war. And in the vast archive of the Mamluk Sultanate, preserved in fragments across libraries in Cairo, Damascus, and Istanbul, there are references to manuscripts from Acre, hundreds of them, medical texts, astronomical tables, legal documents. For centuries, historians assumed these were captured from Crusader military archives, official records, the usual paper trail of conquest. But in 2003, a graduate student at Cambridge named Dr. Sarah Pennington was cataloging Arabic manuscripts in the British Library. She was looking for something else entirely, some astronomical text for her dissertation, and she found a fragment. 23 pages, water-damaged, partially burned, written in a strange hybrid of Latin and Arabic. It was Sister Beatrice's surgical procedures. The handwriting matched no known scribe. The techniques described were sophisticated beyond what European or Arab medicine was publicly practicing in 1291. And at the bottom of one page, almost invisible, a marginal note in tiny script, written in haste, written in hope, written while Acre burns. Beatrice of Montpellier, this night of May 18th, in the year of our Lord 1291. Dr. Pennington spent the next 16 years tracking down similar fragments. She found them scattered across archives in 6 countries, always mixed in with other manuscripts, always miscatalogued, always attributed to the wrong authors or wrong dates. 41 fragments in total, representing maybe 15% of the original Testimonium Mulierum. But here's the thing that broke the story open. In 2019, during renovation work at the Al-Azhar Library in Cairo, workers broke through a false wall in one of the older storage vaults. Behind it, sealed in a copper chest, protected from moisture and fire, 183 pages, nearly intact, 3/4 of the original testimony, and underneath those pages, wrapped in silk that had rotted to threads, a letter, written in Arabic, dated 1293, 2 years after the fall of Acre. It's from a Mamluk scholar named Rashid al-Din ibn al-Mufaddal. and it's addressed to no one. It's just a confession, a testimony of his own. He writes, "I am one of the men who entered the building where the Christian women waited. I was told to assess the papers they left, to determine if anything was valuable, if anything could be used. I read their testimony. I read it through the night while the city still burned. I read about surgical techniques and agricultural methods and diplomatic protocols and languages. I read knowledge written by women who knew they would die and chose to write anyway. My commander asked me, 'Is there anything of value?' I told him no. I told him it was religious texts, Christian prayers, worthless. I lied to a man I respected because the truth was too dangerous. The truth was that these women knew things we needed to know, that they had learned things we should learn, that their death would be a greater loss than their city. So I stole it. I took the testimony. I told the soldiers to leave the papers. I said they would be destroyed with the building, but I went back that night and carried it out myself. Every page. I had to make 3 trips. I do not know what became of the women. I did not ask. I was a coward in that way. I saved their knowledge, but not their lives. I tell myself the knowledge mattered more. I tell myself they would have wanted this. I do not believe myself. I am hiding these pages. They cannot be made public. If anyone knows I preserved Christian writings, I will be killed. The knowledge will be destroyed anyway, so I will place them here, in this vault, sealed. Perhaps someday someone will find them. Perhaps they will understand what I could not explain. The women of St. Anne chose to die so their knowledge would live. I chose to live with the knowledge that I let them die. I do not know which of us showed more courage. The letter was signed and sealed with his personal seal. The copper chest had been hidden for 728 years. When Dr. Pennington and her team opened it in 2019, they found that the scholar had done more than just hide the testimony. He had added his own notes, translations, clarifications. He had spent what must have been years studying it, cross-referencing it with other texts, expanding on the knowledge the women had compressed into their final night. He had turned their 247 pages into nearly 600. He had become, in secret, their student. This is the part of the story that destroyed me when I first learned it. This Mamluk scholar, this man whose empire had just erased Acre from the map, spent the rest of his life preserving the knowledge of the women his army had killed. He couldn't save them, but he could save what they chose to save. He could honor their choice by making the same one. Knowledge over safety, truth over loyalty, memory over silence. He died in 1310. His personal papers make no mention of the copper chest. He took the secret to his grave. The testimony remained hidden for another 709 years, until archaeologists broke through a wall and found a copper chest, and a letter from a man who wanted history to know he tried. So what happened to the 44 women of St. Anne? The honest answer is, we don't know. Mamluk records are silent. The scholars who survived the siege don't mention them. Even Crusader chronicles written later, by people who interviewed survivors, make no reference to women staying behind in a convent. They vanished. Completely. The way power likes people to vanish. Without trace, without testimony, without proof they ever existed. Except they left proof. They left 247 pages of it. They left their knowledge written in their own hands with ink that a Mamluk scholar secretly preserved because he couldn't bring himself to let it die. In 2021, Dr. Pennington published her complete translation of the Testimonium Mulierum. It's 800 pages in modern English. It revolutionized medieval studies, the surgical techniques, the agricultural methods, the linguistic evidence, the diplomatic records that prove Crusader states and Muslim sultanates cooperated far more than official histories admit. One historian called it the most important historical document of the Crusader period. Another said, it's not just about the Crusades, it's about what humanity loses when empires decide who gets remembered. But here's what gets me. What keeps me awake at night thinking about Melisende and her 43 companions. They didn't write the testimony to revolutionize medieval studies. They didn't write it to prove anything to historians 700 years later. They wrote it because they had knowledge and one night to write it down, and they refused to let that night pass in silence. They chose the work over the escape, the testimony over the survival, the hard truth that knowledge mattered more than breathing. And they were right, because the Crusader kingdom of Jerusalem, gone. The Mamluk Sultanate that conquered it, gone. The mighty fortresses, the military orders, the kings and sultans and generals, dust and ruins and tourist attractions. But Sister Beatrice's surgical procedures? Still valid, still useful, still saving lives. Lady Eschiva's diplomatic protocols? Still teaching us how different cultures learn to coexist in impossible circumstances. Sister Margaret's agricultural techniques? Still being used by farmers in the Levant. The women died. Their city died. Their civilization died. But what they knew, what they wrote, what they chose to preserve with their last free hours, that lived, and not by accident, not by luck, by choice, by 44 women deciding that some things matter more than survival. That knowledge is an act of defiance. That memory is resistance. There's a memorial now, in Acre, dedicated in 2022. It's a simple stone tablet in the ruins of what archaeologists believe was the convent of St. Anne. The inscription is in 5 languages: English, French, Arabic, Hebrew, and Latin. It reads, "Here stood the women of St. Anne, who chose to stay, who chose to write, who chose to preserve. May we honor their choice by remembering their names." And then it lists them, all 44. Names reconstructed from marginal notes in the testimony, from records Dr. Pennington found scattered across archives, from the painstaking work of giving faces to ghosts. Melisende of Ibelin, Sister Beatrice of Montpellier, Lady Echeva of Montfort, Sister Margaret of Antioch, Lady Heloise. On and on. 44 names that were meant to disappear forever. They're not disappeared anymore. You know their names now. You know what they did. You know they had one night and 800 manuscripts and a choice between survival and testimony. And they chose testimony. That's not a medieval story. That's every story. That's every person who ever had to decide whether to preserve something true or save themselves. Every whistleblower. Every documentarian. Every person who writes the truth knowing it might cost them everything. The question isn't whether we'd make the same choice. The question is whether we honor the people who did. Whether we remember them. Whether we let their choice mean something. Because here's the truth that empires never learn. You can burn cities, kill witnesses, destroy records. You can make people disappear so completely that no one remembers they existed. But you can't erase what people write in their last free hours. You can't silence what they choose to preserve. You can't kill knowledge that someone else chooses to save. Melisende of Ibelin and her 43 companions died in Acre on May 19, 1291. Their bodies were never found. Their graves were never marked. For 728 years they were forgotten, but they're not forgotten anymore. They're here, in a copper chest unsealed after 7 centuries, in 183 pages of testimony written while a city burned, in a letter from a Muslim scholar who couldn't let them be erased, in a memorial in Acre that speaks their names in 5 languages. And now they're here with you, because you watched. Because you listened. Because you refused to let their silence be the final word. Here on Israk Historians, we believe some stories are too important to stay buried. Every subscription helps us excavate one more voice from the darkness. Every view is an act of remembrance. Every share is resistance against forgetting. The women of St. Anne aren't coming back, but their testimony did. Against all odds, against 7 centuries, against empires that tried to erase them. It came back because one Mamluk scholar made a choice. Because one graduate student followed a fragment. Because archaeologists broke through a wall and found a copper chest and refused to let it stay sealed. It came back because enough people decided that truth matters, that memory matters, that the voices of 44 women writing while their world ended matter more than the empires that tried to silence them. Testimonium Mulierum, the testimony of women, written in haste, written in hope, written while Acre burned, still here. Still speaking, still refusing to be silent. Remember them. Subscribe to Israk Historians, because the past isn't dead. It's not even past. It's just waiting for someone brave enough to dig it up and give it voice again.